we're going to look at something interesting. At least for me, it was interesting when I was researching it on the staff of Moses. You know, you hear basically the staff, and he carried it, and big deal. He did miraculous things with his staff. So when I went back and researched it, I found it interesting. So hopefully you guys will too. First mention of this staff we're going to find in Genesis 38:18. And he said, "What pledge shall I give thee?" And she said, "Thy signet and thy bracelets and thy staff that is in thine hand." And he gave it to her, and he came into her, and she conceived by him. So this goes back to Tamar, you know, when Judah and Tamar, they went to Timnath, you know, and he took his sheep there to have them sheared. At that point, you know, his daughter-in-law, which was Tamar, had taken off her widow's garments and put a veil on her face, so she, you know, he wouldn't know who she was. And he's sitting at the gate looking for something that he can, you know, for a prostitute, really, is what he was looking for. And so not knowing who she was, he chose her because she was beautiful. And, you know, he wants to give her a sheep from the first flock, which, you know, she wanted that, but she wanted something else to prove that, hey, this is who it is. Sheep would tell you nothing, it's like giving you a dog. Mm-hmm. You know? So, you know, at that point, she had given, you know, he had given her, she says, "I want your staff and everything," because that signet ring is your identity back then. It was your seal of approval that you would put on letters and documents and everything. So there was just no way you could get away with, you know, saying, "Oh, that, you know, that wasn't me." So this is where the staff is going to come into. Judah, you know, again, he was a shepherd. So the noun used here is Matteh. It's M-A-T-T-E-H. And it means a staff, a rod, a branch, or a tribe. So this is going to carry into the 12 tribes. The staff is going to. And so Moses, on the other hand, was also a shepherd. So he's going to have a staff, and it will be used throughout the wilderness journey to show God's miraculous signs and wonders that he's going to do. Also from the meaning we find, it means tribes, nations, people. So each one of the tribes are going to be designated by Matteh. You know, again, the Hebrew word, which is found in Joshua 14:1, where he's going to make a divisions of the tribes into Canaan is going to take place. So this all corresponds together. Now, years ago, when we were still up in the church in Eldersburg, one of the ladies that was there made me a shepherd's staff. And I think it's up in his closet. And I always assumed this is what this shepherd's staff looked like. I mean, just around, looked like a cane, a big cane, except it's tall. And of course, it's got the hook on it, something like the picture over there, like Jesus had up. You know, because it was used for the sheep to get the sheep, the crown part, to pull the sheep back into line. So, if you take it back even further, to go back to this shepherd's staff to research it, I found in the Sacred Text Archives, which you have to go back, anything you're going to research, you got to go back and really find and dig for information. But there's a secret text archive that's out there, and it says, and it records what Moses' rod was like, and it reads this way, and I'm quoting this: "When Adam and Eve went forth from paradise, Adam, as if knowing that he was never to return to his place, cut off the branch from the tree of good and evil, which is the fig tree, and took it with him, and he went forth. And he served him as a staff all the days of his life. After the death of Adam, his son Seth took it, for there was no weapon as of yet at that time. This rod was passed from hand to hand unto Noah, and from Noah to Shem, and it was handed down from Shem to Abraham as a blessed thing from the paradise of God. With this rod Abraham broke the images and graven idols which his father made, and therefore God said to him, Get thee out of thy father's house. So it was in his hand in every country as far as Egypt, and from Egypt to Palestine. Afterwards Isaac's going to take it, and it was handed down from Isaac to Jacob. With it he fled the flocks of Laban to Aram, to Padan Aram. After Jacob, Judah, his fourth son, took it, and this is the rod which Judah gave to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, with his signet ring and his napkin, as the hire for what he had done. From him it went to Pharez, and at that time there was wars everywhere, and an angel took the rod and laid it in the cave of treasures in the mount of Moab, until Midian was built. There was a Midian man upright and righteous before God, whose name was Jephthah. He was feeding the flock on the mountain. He found the cave and took the rod by divine agency, and with him he fed his sheep until his old age. When he gave his daughter to Moses, he said to him, "Go in, my son, and take the rod and go forth to thy flock." So Moses had set his foot upon the threshold of the door, and the angel moved the rod, and it came out of it on its own free will and toward Moses. And Moses took the rod, and it was with him until God spake with him on Mount Sinai. Then you go over into 1 Chronicles. If you go there, 11:23, it says, "And he slew an Egyptian, and a man of great stature, 5 cubits high. And the Egyptian's hand was a spear like a weaver's beam. And he went down to him with a staff, and plucked the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and slew him with his own spear." All that in 2 Chronicles goes back to Moses. It alludes to him. That's what that's talking about. So we're going to look at Exodus 3. 16. Okay, Exodus 3:16 to 4:5. Mike, you got it? Mike, you
Okay.
got it?
Exodus 3:16 to 4:5. Okay. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, "The Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has been done to you in Egypt. And I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt into the land of Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites, a land flowing with milk and honey. The elders of Israel will listen to you. Then you and the elders are to go to the king of Egypt and say to him, The Lord, the God of the Hebrews, has met with us. Let us take a 3-day journey into the desert and offer sacrifices to the Lord our God. But I know that the king of Egypt will not let you go unless a mighty hand compels him. So I will stretch out my hand and strike the Egyptians with all the wonders that I will perform among them. After that he will let you go. And I will make the Egyptians favorably disposed toward this people, so that when you leave, you will not go empty-handed. Every woman is to ask her neighbor, and any woman living in her house, for articles of silver and gold, and for clothing, which you will put on your sons and daughters, and so you will plunder the Egyptians. Moses answered, What if they do not believe me or listen to me and say, The Lord did not appear to you? Then the Lord said to him, What is that in your hand? A staff, he replied. The Lord said, Throw it on the ground. Moses threw it on the ground, and it became a snake, and he ran from it. Then the Lord said to him, Reach out your hand and take it by the tail. So Moses reached out and took hold of the snake, and it turned back into a staff in his hand. This, said the Lord, is so that they may believe that the Lord, the God of their fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob, has appeared to you.
And so here we find Moses really did not want to do what God called him to do. If you read further into this, you know that he made all sorts of excuses, slow in speech, probably stuttered. Everything he could think of to imagine that, when God told him to do it, say, oh, there's somebody else. That's how Aaron's going to come into the picture, because he's going to send Aaron too, so it's going to be the 2 of them. And so, it's here, that God asked him, what's in his hand. He tells him, the rod's going to be used to perform miracles. So the Hebrew word, otot, it's O-T-O-T, it's an icon for signs. So it's going to be the otot, the signs for wonders, healings, plagues, manna, water, it's all going to be, that's what otot means in Hebrew. So in Exodus 4:20, it says, "And Moses took his wife and his sons and set them upon the ass, and he returned to the land of Egypt. And Moses took the rod of God in his hand." So here he's been in Egypt. He's got this rod in his hand. And it says, the Targum, which is another Hebrew reference, which is paraphrased. The Targum will paraphrase it, and it will give an explanation and expands on the Jewish way of thinking, because this is a Jewish Bible. It comes back and it puts 4:20, that verse that I just read, this way. It said, "And Moshe," which is Moses, "took his wife and his sons and made them ride on the ass and returned to the land of Mizraim," which is Egypt. "And Moshe took the rod which he had brought away from the chamber of the father-in-law, and it was from the sapphire, the throne of glory, and weighed 40 seams, and upon it was engraved and set forth the great and glorious name by which the sign should be wrought before the Lord by his hand." Now, Exodus 4:21 says, "And, the Lord said unto Moses, When thou returnest to Egypt, see that you do all these wonders before Pharaoh, which I have put in thy hand." He's telling him, you're going to do this because of what I put in your hand. "But I will harden his heart that he shall not let the people go." So, where is the miracles? Yeah, the miracles are in his hand. It's not in the rod, it's in his hand. It's, remember that, not in the staff. On the staff or the rod, according to translations, they put it both ways. The Midrash, which again is another Jewish reference, says it weighed 40 seahs. Now, it was of sapphire, and the 10 plagues were engraved on it in abbreviated form, and the order that they would bring about the plagues. So this is on this staff. So this is what's going to take place with this staff. It's put down. It's, it's what's in his hand. Also engraved on this staff is going to be the patriarchs, which would be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the matriarchs. The 6 matriarchs would be on it: Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, Leah, Bilhah, and Zephalah, and then the 12 sons of Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, all 12 of them would be on that. Also, 40, is an interesting number when it says it's 40 seah. That's how much it weighed. Well, if you break that down, it's an interesting number. It says the biblical law gives the requirements for how big a mikvah, which is when you immerse, when you clean yourself, it's a mikvah. And that's what the priest had to do. Must be able to contain the proper amount of water needed for this immersion. So they estimated it to be a square cubit to the height of 3 cubits, because it had to be big enough that you could get in, even if you had to bend your knees to go down like that to immerse yourself. And it would hold 40 seahs of water. So you're seeing how the number fits in here. Now, sapphire, I looked sapphire up yesterday. Sapphire in Greek means blue stone. It's a beautiful blue stone. I mean, it's gorgeous. I don't know how else to say it. It ranks second in hardness, next to the diamond, and the emerald's another hard stone that is hard. Which makes sense when you start thinking about this staff and you follow the weave through the Bible, and the things that he did. He struck the rock with it. Well, striking the rock with just a stick isn't going to produce water from the rock. It's going to have to be something hard. So in the Bible, we find the sapphire mentioned in Exodus 24:10, where Moses, Aaron, Nadab, and Abihu, and the 70 elders, they go up to Mount Sinai, saw the God of Israel, and under his feet were paved sapphire stones. Ezekiel 1:26 goes on to tell us that God's throne is made of sapphire. And so does Job 28:16, said it was costly. And in Exodus 28:18, we find the sapphire is on the breastplate, of course, of the high priest. And in Revelations, we find that the sapphire is in the foundation stones of the New Jerusalem. And I don't know whether I missed it or not, but this staff is going to weigh roughly 600 pounds. This thing isn't going to be just something light. I think, through the ages and through teachings, we automatically assume stuff, just like, last week, Larry was talking about the Ark of the Covenant. And, and the Levites had to carry it. Well, we've always looked at that and said, oh, okay, no big deal, just lift it up, put it on their shoulders, and away they go with it. But when you do the research on the Ark of the Covenant, you find that the Ark of the Covenant was made with gold. When you put something gold that heavy, 6 men aren't going to be able to lift it, to carry it. So how is this ark going to move? Why did people die with it? You know, God would have had to supernaturally put it on and let it float, you know, on their shoulders as they walked it, because that's why the waters parted. You know, this is the same thing that we look at this staff. We're looking at a 635-pound staff that he's going to carry. What man could carry that in one hand? Could you, Jordan? No. So this is God's divine intervention that's going to come in here. So this staff is going to be, you know, we looked at the high priest robe. Revelation, we find staff are as the foundation stone for the New Jerusalem. So now we look at the staff, because the staff's going to do what? The plagues. And the plagues can be broken down into 3 groups, according to, you know, the Jewish teachings. The first group would be initiated by Aaron with the use of Moshe's staff. So here this staff's going to be back and forth, you know, between Moses and Aaron. Purpose of, you know, the plagues, the first 3 is going to be God's existence. He's going to show these people, you know, through the blood, through the frogs, through the lice, about his existence. Second group is going to be initiated through God, again, but it's going to be divine providence, and that's going to be the beast, the cattle, and the boils. Third group will be initiated by Moses, or Moshe, and it shows that God's a universal God, because you've got the hail and fire, you've got the locusts, and you've got the darknesses. And then, of course, the final group, group number 10, is going to be brought on by God, because it's going to be the death of the first one. 6 of the 10 plagues were performed with the use of the staff, 6 of the 10. And the rest of the plagues were initiated by God himself. The Midrash, which is, again, it's a Jewish, it's an exegetical, homiletic thing that you can read, speaks of how the plagues were divided. They said plagues 1, 4, and 7 introduced a meeting between Moses and Pharaoh in the morning. So 1, 4, and 7 would be the blood, would be the beast, and number 7 is the hail and the fire. Hail and fire is interesting too. How can you have fire and hail? Think about it. I mean, we read this stuff and you just think, oh, okay. Every time I've seen hail here, I've never seen fire and hail. Have you?
Depends on what the hail's made of.
Yeah, probably. I never thought of it that way. Anyway, plagues 2, 5, and 8 take place at Pharaoh's palace. Plagues 3, 6, and 9 take place without warning. Now, how long did these plagues last? Well, nobody knows for sure. At one point in time, I heard they lasted 7 days, a month in between, and then they would give another one. Most recently, they came out, you know, in the Jewish Midrash, you know, they have another book, you know, that puts Deuteronomy. It's like a commentary, you know, on, and he puts it this way: the plagues came every 30 days and lasted for 7 days, and then departed. So that would mean they would have about 23 days where nothing happened. But what happens in 23 days? What would happen with us in 23 days? If we had something major happen, then we get a reprieve for 23 days. What would happen?
Relax.
Yeah, you would think, oh, there's nothing. Yeah, it's gone. We can move on. And that's what these people thought. Oh, 23 days. Oh, we got by that. No big deal. And then the next one comes. So this is going to work out, when you look at it, that it's going to work out to a year. 1 year for all these plagues to go through. The first plague is going to be what? You know, it's going to be done with the sapphire staff. And the first plague is going to take place, and it's the blood, because it's going to be done in Nisan. Okay, Passover. Okay, so you got the major thing taking place in Passover. Passover takes place between March and April in that time period. And then you got Iyar, Sivan, Tammuz. You got those 3 months. Nothing happened. Okay, we're relaxed. It's over with. 3 months have gone by. Nothing. And then boom, the next plagues all hits. You got the frogs that are going to come in. And then in Lud, you got lice and the beast, and each thing, hail and fire, all the way down to Nisan again, when the death of the firstborn goes and takes place. So this staff or rod, is going to be capable of transforming different actions when it's in the hand of Moses or Aaron compared to what it is when it's on the ground. It's going to be totally different. So God had chosen Moses and Aaron. Aaron is going to be in the lineage of the high priest. And so, you know, Moses and Aaron would be considered righteous men. So he's just not going to give it to any Joe Blow that is not, righteous in his eyes. So that's why these two men were chosen. So in the hand of these righteous men, God would use the staff for good, to create, and for judgment when he put it on the ground. And so, how did these plagues occur? Well, I thought this was interesting too. I was telling Larry just recently, they did some research on, how did these plagues occur? I mean, was it a supernatural act of God, or what transpired with it? So I went back and I found that on the National Geographic Channel, they did this whole thing on the plagues where climatologists came involved in it. And they recorded it this way. They said that archaeologists believe the 10 plagues occurred in the city of Pi Ramses, which is located on the Nile Delta. This is where Ramses II reigned during his second reign as pharaoh. So that would put it back to that 1279 BC or 1213 BC. And why do they believe this is where the plagues occurred? It's because the city was abandoned. Now, why would the city be abandoned? If the plague was there, would you say? Right. So that's number one reason they thought. Then the climatologists come in, and now they can go back and date weather patterns. What was the weather like? You click on even WBAL TV here and listen to the news, and they will tell you the high temperature this day was in 1800s, and the low temperature. They tell you all that because they've kept records. Well, here again, the climatologists recorded the weather pattern shifted from a warm, wet climate to a dry period. Just like, here we're getting all this, this rain, or snow, but in the summer we go through droughts, where the riverbeds go. This is what happened in Egypt. So when you get to the proper amounts of rain, everything's okay. Things bloom, things thrive, grass looks good. When it doesn't, you got to water the grass and everything. But if you hit a dry period, it produces just the opposite effect. And so the Nile River would have become muddy, and I have to tell you, because I've been there, it's still muddy today. It has not changed. It's mucky, it's ucky, it's nasty looking. It's not like, okay, I want to get in a boat and go down the Nile, because it's dirty, filthy water. So the water becomes muddy, and when it becomes muddy and it becomes hot, what happens? What happens to water when it's hot and mucky and?
It's like swampy.
Yeah, it becomes like algae. Algae grows in it. I mean, it's formation of algae. So if you've got algae that's going to be forming, you're going to add frogs to that. Now frogs, lice and flies, they're plagues 2, 3, and 4. From a tadpole to a frog is done by the release of a hormone. That's how they go from one to another. But if the tadpole becomes stressed, now that would stress me out. I'm now in murky water, that would stress me out. Due to the situation that he's in, due to the environment that he's living in, it would speed up that process, to get the frogs out of the environment they were in. So they're going to do like a rabbit, just mass produce. What happens when you mass produce?
Too much.
Too much, and what happens?
You gotta run.
Yeah, they die. You're reproducing too fast. So something's going to die. So if they mass produced in a short period of time, the survival rate would be slim. They'd be producing and dying, producing and dying, producing and dying. And a lot of frogs would have died producing toxins that were in the Nile, would have killed the frogs, and then make it into a perfect environment for what? The flies and the lice, because they're going to see all this dead things. And anytime you see dead things, you see flies flying around. That's going to give you the flies and lice. From there we go to plagues 5 and 6, the death of the livestock and the boils. Well, insects, if you get flies and lice and they go from one thing to another, they're going to carry diseases. And if they carry diseases, they carry malaria, can be epidemic, and people at that point are now going to die. Then you get to plague 7, 8, and 9, you got hail, locusts, and darkness. Now, on the Greek island of Sanatori, just north of Crete, there's a volcano that erupted 3,500 years ago. releasing tons of volcanic ash into the atmosphere. So, the atmospheric physics lab in Germany believed that it clashed with the thunderstorms that were above Egypt at this time because they're in a drought to produce hailstorms. The locusts from the fallout from the ash. So, weather abnormalities can cause higher precipitation, can cause humidity, which would produce the locusts. The volcanic ash would block out the sun with your darkness, and it did that a few years ago. We happened to be down in Orlando, and they had a volcano erupt somewhere in Europe. You know that? And nobody could get home because they weren't letting the planes fly. Remember that, Larry? Because we got stuck in all that mess down there.
I'm sure do.
So this is, when stuff goes up in the air, you can't put a plane in it. They wouldn't let nobody go home. So back this up with the volcanic ash in Egypt, they have found pumice stone made from cool volcanic lava that during the excavations of Egypt. So they, there's no volcanoes in Egypt. So they know this had to be blown, and that backed it up that it was there. And they had it analyzed. Okay, we found pumice stone. Where did this come from? So they take it and have it analyzed. Found it came from the island of Crete, Santorini. So they knew that when that thing erupted, this is all in that time period. And that brings us to the death of the firstborn, according to the article. It says, how did that happen? Okay, they believe it was caused by a fungus that poisoned the grain supply. So all the males firstborn died. I do not totally understand this. I can understand, males like you, but it affected the livestock too. It just didn't affect humans. But it said all the males would have had the first pickings, so they would be the first to fall. Now whether the male, cattle, when they ate it, they must have fell. I assume that's what happened. But that's how they say it happened. And they ended that article by saying this, and the whole point was that you didn't come out of Egypt by natural causes, you came out by the hand of God. And there was one final thought that I thought was fantastic on the matter, and it was quoted again. I'm quoting it from the Weekly Constitutional that was written in 2013, a year ago. And it says, if the plagues were brought about by the hand of God, then the stories from the Exodus are true. And God himself removed the Jews from bondage of slavery. But what if science really has proven that the cause of the plagues to be nothing more than natural occurring phenomena presented to Ramses by a very skilled performer? Might Moses have been nothing more than a televangelist of his day, shucking and jiving about claiming to have brought about the suffering of the Egyptian people? Does this change the course of history? The Jews were still removed from their shackles of bondage and went on to settle in the land promised to them. Even if the plagues were brought about by natural occurring events, does it invalidate the existence of a God merely because he used conventional means to get his point across? And I love it. He ended the article this way. Like my mother always said, the Lord works in mysterious ways. Amen.
Amen.
George.
Well, why don't we just sing a little bit, because I think it's kind of early. They want to give them a few more